My goal tonight is threefold. First, to explain the rationale for better measures of poverty. Second, to highlight what we can learn from multidimensional measures of well-being, poverty and inequality. And thirdly, to highlight the key contributions of this new measure. So firstly, why is a new measure needed? A new measure is needed because measuring poverty is an important task and because monetary measures alone are inadequate. What we measure matters, especially when we're tackling poverty and gender inequality. There's a major power in numbers. And with the Millennium Development Goals and now the post-2015 framework and the increasing focus that we all see on results, the focus on numbers is here to stay. How many people are poor, who is poor, and what are the major correlates of poverty are key questions with central relevance for governments, for policymakers, stakeholders and advocates. They're central to all of us committed to reducing poverty and inequality and promoting social justice. Current measures are inadequate, and this limits our effectiveness in addressing poverty. The World Bank's own international poverty line, the so-called $1.25 a day measure, and most national poverty lines use income or consumption to assess poverty. Money is obviously important, but it's not the whole picture. Other key aspects include malnutrition, poor sanitation, lack of electricity, and ramshackle schools, among other things. And as Joe's already mentioned, all the existing measures use household-level data, which assume that everyone in the household is equally poor or not poor, and ignore differences in well-being based on gender, status, and age. And the reliance on household measures means that we can't actually work out how many women and girls are poor. Many of you may have heard the oft-cited statement that most of the world's poor are women. Oftentimes, the figure of 70% is quoted. But to be frank, this number is basically fictitious. We have no way of knowing, based on current data and methods, the relative female and male shares of poverty. We do indeed have some measures of gender equality, like those published by the World Economic Forum and by the United Nations Development Programme in their Gender Inequality Index, but these are largely population and administration based. They don't tell us about overlapping disadvantage. So, then what can we learn from multidimensional measures? The short answer is a lot. And the headlines are different to what we learn from $1 a day. Using the $1 a day measures, the most recent numbers after the revision of the purchasing power numbers are about 1.2 billion people poor in the world today. The headlines for the MPI are 1.6 billion, clearly much higher, and different results at the country level. It's like a high-resolution lens. And indeed, when we look at the draft framework for the post-2015 period, it's notable that the first goal, which is the goal about ending poverty in all its forms everywhere, goes beyond $1 a day, and it commits to halving the share of men, women and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions by 2030. So turning now to the new Individual Deprivation Measure. The object, I think, has already been quite well described by Joe, was to identify how poverty should be best conceived and measured. It was indeed an international research effort, very much interdisciplinary in nature, bringing together academics, practitioners, NGOs, and working very closely with local researchers and NGOs, talking to poor men and women in half a dozen countries around the world: Angola, Fiji, Indonesia, Malawi, Mozambique, and the Philippines, and covering 3 sites in each, so rural, urban, as well as marginalised sites. So, for example, internally displaced people or others facing exclusion. So in the course of doing this research, they talked to almost 2,000 people around the world and developed the measure. But the basic approach is to measure whether or not an individual adult is deprived across 15 aspects of life. And these aspects of life were identified through this participatory research. And they range from food, water and sanitation, to time use, violence, contraception, and voice in the community. So why is the Individual Deprivation Measure innovative? I think the innovation is in 2 major ways. Firstly, as has already been mentioned, it's measuring the poverty of individuals, not just households. In this sense, it's different from all the other measures which are currently on the table, including the monetary measures used by the World Bank, the multidimensional poverty index, which I mentioned, because they're all based on household surveys. So they've developed this new questionnaire. It's administered to individual adults, and by assessing at the individual level, it can reveal differences in well-being within the household, across communities, and so on. And secondly, in terms of the innovation, are the new areas which are included, which we typically don't see in this type of work in a systematic way, including safety, voice and agency, and social relationships. And it's incorporating these aspects that poor people themselves identified as being important to their well-being. And so therefore it can capture differences across individuals and between men and women in particular. And being both poverty and gender sensitive is certainly a plus. So why is this relevant to all of you? Let me just highlight 3 points. First, the fact that the methodology is available for use by governments, by international agencies, NGOs and local communities. The methodology is publicly available and technical files are available on request. And as analysis becomes available for additional countries and can be used, I think, in programming to help inform decisions about resource allocations, given better and richer understanding of the correlates of poverty. For example, the Australian government now is using the methodology to pursue a further analysis of poverty and programming priorities in Fiji. It's also important, as Joe also alluded to think about this as a way of filling the gaps in knowledge that we have, in particular around gender. In small states in the Pacific, for example, there are major gaps in knowledge, but not only in the Pacific, in many countries around the world. So the IDM may turn out to be an innovative way in filling some of the gaps in our knowledge across all these different areas. I think the first thing that I just wanted to underline, that this is really very exciting work, and it's great to see Australia leading innovations on this important front. Secondly, that it's really very timely, because the post-2015 conversations are revealing that multidimensional poverty and concerns around violence and gender disparities are very much mainstream elements now in the development agenda. And thirdly, that we do need to be investing in filling data gaps. Now's the time to mobilise resources to fill data gaps, to improve quality and to boost country capacity so this important agenda can move forward in a concerted way.